Today is all about flowers. Welcome to the Chic Show. Today's playlist, Flower Palooza, is hosted by our very own Indie Annie Jones. Find her channel and the link to the playlist in the description box below. This is a sign that was originally from Dollar Tree, I believe, and I did something else with it, but I've removed all of that and I'm going to reuse it now. I'm also going to be using some of these letters from Dollar Tree. They were from a summer packet of letters. It spelled like relax, beach, things like that. I'm going to be using an L, an E, and I had to make a V out of the A. And then I'm going to be using one of these wood heart cutouts from Dollar Tree for the O. I'll be using Waverly chalk paint in white to paint each of these letters. I'm going to use Fusion in Peony to paint just the black part of this board. Now I'm going to use some Type Bond Quick and Thick to glue these letters to the sign. Now I have some transfers from IOD's Rose Botanical that I want to use on and around each of the letters. Add just a bit of sparkle. I'm going to be using a little bit of gold rub and buff. This project uses only a few simple materials, including a wood egg cutout and a paint inlay. A rub-on transfer, stipple, or scrap paper would work as well. First, I painted the front, back, and sides of my egg using Waverly chalk paint in plaster. This is my favorite warm white. Now I'm using a paint inlay that I got in Sonnet's Maker's Box, and I'm just going to cut it and piece it together to cover as much of the egg as I can, and then I'll use some painter's tape to tape it in place. Now, in hindsight, I wish I had not taped it in place because it was a little difficult to work with. I wish I had just done it piece by piece, but it worked out okay. Now, for a paint inlay, you do want to give it a coat of paint, let it dry, and then give it a second coat. And while it's wet, spritz the paint inlay with some water and then lay it gently on your surface. And here you can see I'm struggling just a little bit. I did have some wrinkles. In the end, they're not as noticeable on camera as they are in person, but hopefully I can fix that later. Once I have everything placed like I want it, I did give it another spritz of water, and then I used a paper towel and just dabbed that excess water back while pressing down onto the paint. So we want the paint from the inlay to go into the wet paint that I have applied. Once it is completely dry, and I did wait several hours for this, once it's completely dry, I did spritz it with more water, again dabbed back some of the excess water and pressed down at the same time, and then we'll be able to pull that paper back. The great thing about paint inlays is that you can use them 2 or 3 times. Each time the color will get a little bit lighter and lighter, but it's great for a distressed look. And just as a reminder, you can use scrapbook paper and decoupage that on. You could use rub-on transfers or even stamps. As I pull away the rub-on transfer, I am just setting aside those little scrap pieces. I probably won't reuse those, but this larger piece in the middle I will reuse. I will set this aside to dry, and then I will seal it with a clear spray paint. Now, once this is completely dry, I'm going to use my gold stamp pad to stamp around the edges, kind of give it a look of gold leaf. And I just want that sporadic in random places all around the edges. I'm going to be using one of these signs. I believe it's from Dollar Tree. And I have already sanded off all of the glitter on the front, and I'm just going to give this a coat of white chalk paint. Now that this has 2 coats of paint, I'm going to be using this stencil. It is from Hobby Lobby. I got it on clearance at like 90% off. So there are 2 sheets here. I'm going to be using this one with the smaller detail. I'm going to use some painter's tape to keep my stencil in place. And I'm not using paint for this, I'm actually using modeling paste. So I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm going to smear the modeling paste all over the stencil so that when we pull it back, we'll have this raised texture. Now I'm going to set this aside to dry. Once it's dry, I'm going to paint over the top again with Waverly chalk paint and Snow White. I'm going to add to the center one of these wood chalkboard tags from Dollar Tree, but I want to cover up that hole, so I just made a little bow for the top. It's not really going to show anyway. And then I'm using 2 of these paper flowers that I think I got from Hobby Lobby in the wedding section, and I've glued those to the little chalkboard tag as well. I'm going to hot glue that to the center of my canvas, and then I'm going to use this little stamp down here that says Beautiful. I think I got this in a pack from Tuesday morning when they were open. These are some wood shims that I had in my craft stash, and I'm going to be using 4 of them, and I'm going to use some antique wax by Waverly mixed with a little bit of water, and I'm going to stain one side of all 4 of them, including the edges. Shims are like a very thin wedge, so one end is thicker than the other. So when I glue these together, I'm going to want one thick part to be glued to the thin part of the other one, and you'll see that in a few minutes. Now I'm going to take this sheet music that I thrifted, and I'm going to cut it to fit this piece of watercolor paper, and I had just cut this to fit in with my wood shims. I don't even know what size it is. And I'm simply doing this because I want to glue it onto that watercolor paper just so the music is a little bit thicker and has a little bit more stability. Then once I have done that, I'm taking one of IOD's pastiche stamps, and I'm just going to stamp these beautiful roses right in the middle of the music. Now I'm using some Titebond Quick and Thick, and I'm going to smear that onto the back of one of those shims, and then I'll place my music on top of it. Once I have my music placed, I'm going to add a little bit more glue to the top of it, and then I'm going to place down the other shim. And remember, here you're gluing the thick part of one end to the thin part of the other. And then I'm just using some clamps to clamp those together until they dry. I repeated the same thing on the bottom, and then I added one of these vintage clips that I actually ordered from Amazon to the top to be my hanger. Thrifted a couple of different pretty little plates like this. This is about a salad size plate, I would say, and I love the scallop details and the flowers. I'm taking some of these little stamps. They're kind of like the clickable stamps that you can get from Michael's, and I'm spelling out a few words that I want to stamp to the front of this plate. I'm just arranging them so I can kind of see where I'm going to need to stamp, and then one at a time I'm going to stamp the words, and I'm going to start this first line by stamping the first word and the last word so that I can space those out a little bit more evenly. When I got to that second row, I had some trouble with that first word, so I just removed the ink and then restamped it. This is a little stoneware piece that I thrifted for 75 cents, and I'm going to be using, for the first time, some salt wash in this. I'm going to be using Ivory Paint by Waverly, and the salt wash says to apply or mix together 1 part salt wash to 1 part paint. I did add more paint than this because it was super thick, which is what it's supposed to be, but it was just thicker than I was anticipating. Now I'm just using an old brush, and I'm just going to be globbing that paint all over this watering can. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It doesn't have to be neat. You do want it kind of thick and chunky because it's giving it texture, and that's the goal here. Once the paint is completely dry, I'm going to go back and give it a coat of Waverly chalk paint in black. And again, this doesn't have to be a full coverage coat. It's really just up to you and the look that you want. Now that that paint is dry, we're going to bring back some of that texture. I'm using my little finger sander, and I'm sanding away at some of those higher textured marks to bring back some of that ivory paint color. Once I'm finished sanding this piece, I'm going to go over it with a little bit of watered down Waverly Antique wax, and this just really makes the piece look very aged, by darkening up the ivory color and richening up that black color. This would really be cute with an actual plant in it, but I don't have any small plants at this point in the season, so I'm just going to use some of this baby's breath and a little bit of Spanish moss. And that Spanish moss is such a mess, isn't it? I hope you've enjoyed these flower pieces today. Be sure and let me know which one is your favorite down in the comments below. Thanks again to Annie for hosting today's playlist. Please check out her channel and the playlist in the description box below. Here's another video I think you might like. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to share the chic. Bye now.